Hello everybody, Willingdon here, and today I'm going to be looking at the first saddlebag for Doomtown Reloaded. This is called New Town, New Rules. If you're unfamiliar with the saddlebag format, we're going to be getting 21 new cards here, and the pack itself comes with 4 copies of each of those cards. So once you buy the pack, you're going to have enough copies of these cards to play in your deck any number that you'd like. We're going to kick it off with a dude from the 4th Ring faction. This is Zulf Zug. He's an ace of spades, 2 draw, 2 influence. He's 2 to play and 1 upkeep. And that's all he does. He has no abilities. So the first thing that I think about this guy is that the 2 influence for the 2 cost and the 1 upkeep, that's about as low as it gets in the game. We don't really see a whole lot of dudes that are much cheaper when it comes to the influence for cost ratio. The 2 bullets is definitely not irrelevant, though I think it's kind of a tack on that isn't really going to be that important. But I think the huge thing that's holding this guy back is the fact that he's ace of spades in 4th Ring. 4th Ring really likes to play a lot of spells, and all the 4th Ring decks that I've been messing around with play a lot of spells. And aces are generally pretty bad with spells because you're going to pull an incredibly low value. That said, there is another dude in this pack that can mitigate some of that, and I think it's going to be less of a problem for the 4th Ring decks to play some lower value cards in their deck than it has been just with the core set. I think this guy's really strong, and I think that the temptation to play him in 4th Ring is very high. He's such a cheap influence dude, but I think you're not going to be automatically throwing 4 of him into your 4th Ring decks just because of the ace value. Next up we have Slade Liebody. He's a 5 of spades for 4th Ring, and he is 1 draw, 2 influence, 6 to play with 1 upkeep. Huckster 2, and he has a react ability. After he fails a pull again and use that value. Ace the hex after applying the effects of the hex. That rhymes. Slade is a huge contender to replace Steel Archer. Basically what it comes down to is, does the 4 or the 5 matter more to you? Is the 1 money that you save for playing Steel over Slade, is that an advantage? Or is Slade's ability and his bullet more important? I think in a huge number of decks, Slade is going to replace Steel Archer. I think you will probably see quite a few decks playing both, but not necessarily starting both. I think Slade is the starter in most of the hex-oriented 4th Ring decks, which I think is all of the 4th Ring decks that are currently viable. So Slade is really strong because he lets you play more cards that are blanks on your pulls, because you know in that critical situation, if you need to make your spell pull, you'll be able to do it again. And as long as you don't play too many low-value cards, you'll be fine. I think this is especially important for Soul Blast, which is a really good spell, but the ace has kind of held it back in core set. I think this dude is going to be a 4th Ring staple for the foreseeable future. Next up, we have a Law Dogs dude. His name is Rafi Hamid. He is a 7 of spades, 2 draw, 2 influence. He's 5 to play and 1 upkeep, a deputy. He has a shootout ability. 1 or more of your deputies at any locations joins your posse at a government deed, moving if necessary. Well, the first thing to consider, of course, is which government deeds are available. And there's only 1 in the core set, and there's 1 in this pack as well. So I think the fact that the number of government deeds that you can play is pretty limited is going to hold this guy back. But it seems obvious to me that we're going to see quite a few government deeds in the future. And I would anticipate, just by the nature of government and kind of the theme, that these are going to be high control point deeds. So that's going to be, his ability is going to be really relevant for defending some of your most important deeds. I think Town Hall, which is the government deed in the core set, is already pretty good in Law Dogs just because it's the 2 control points, like I said, and it's the value 2, which is a really good number for Law Dogs. There's lots of other cards that you want to play at 2. I think this guy is kind of on the edge of being viable as a starter once we see some more government deeds. As it is, he's a reasonably inexpensive 2 influence, 2 bullet dude. So I think there's still some Law Dogs decks that are going to want to throw this guy in, but I think he's really going to be held back as a starter until we get some more government deeds and see kind of the capabilities of those deeds. Next up, we have Wiley Jenks. He is an 8 of spades, 2 stud, 2 influence, 8 to play, and he's only 1 upkeep. He's a deputy, and he has +1 bullet for each wanted dude in the opposing posse. Well, this guy is quite the heavy hitter. He's really expensive, but he's already 2 influence and 2 stud, and he's an 8 of spades. I think it's fair to say that 8 is the best value in the game, not only from the card pool of a lot of really good cards that are at 8, but also because it's kind of in the middle of the values where if you're trying to pull low or high, you can probably still fit some 8s in your deck. Not to mention it's in the dead man's hand, which there's already a lot of Law Dogs decks trying to do. So I think this guy is going to fit into the existing Law Dog scheme pretty well. I'm looking to play this guy as a 1-of instead of a 4th Stephen Wiles. That's not exactly the most exciting thing, but a lot of Law Dogs decks play hired guns, and having a large dude for when you have a bunch of money and you want to just drop some guy down and control the board, this is going to be really nice as a 1-of. I think it's possible to start this dude. He is really expensive, but the 1 upkeep is affordable and doable. Plus, you already have quite a few no upkeep guys that are strong, like Tommy and like Philip. So I think it's definitely reasonable to consider this guy as a starter, but I think mostly what you're going to be doing is including 1 of this guy in your deck, but I do think that it's probably going to be worth the deck slot, especially since it's already 8 of spades, and that's a value you're almost certainly going to be playing in Law Dogs, and there isn't a whole lot competing for that 8 of spades value outside of like Stephen Wiles. For now, I'm going to be pretty hard-pressed to switch out my Wendy for Wiley Jenks as my starting dude against Sloan, but I definitely think that's something worth exploring. I don't think Wendy is so unbelievably strong against Sloan and their pistol whips and their tricks as having just maybe a larger guy with more influence would be. Next up is Kyle Wagner. He's a Morgan Cattle Company dude, and he is 2 of spades, 1 draw, 0 influence. He's 3 to play, and he is 0 upkeep. He has Mad Scientist 2, and he has Noon Boot. If he's at a ranch, unboot the ranch. Its abilities may be used an additional time this turn. This guy is a serious game changer for the Morgan Cattle Company gadget-oriented decks. I think those were pretty weak in the base set, and this really gives them a viable starting dude that's really inexpensive and powerful. That said, this guy has some serious drawbacks, and I want to talk about those first. He has no influence, which, granted that Morgan Cattle Company is good at getting lots of influence for cheap, having a starting dude with no influence is definitely going to not be the best. He's also a 2 of spades, and that's really begging to get shotgunned or soul blast or a bunch of other things that are based on value. So he is a little bit of a squishy dude, but that said, his ability to unboot ranches is really good. The Circle M ranch alone makes this ability worth doing, but there's a ranch later in this pack that has an economy ability that's going to really synergize with this as well. Mad Scientist 2 is a great value, especially since we're only spending 3 of our starting cash on this dude. I think we're going to see a lot of Morgan Cattle Company decks try to start this guy if they're playing a gadget-oriented strategy. I really think, as the artwork suggests, that the Auto Cattle Feeder is going to be pretty strong in this gadget-oriented deck, especially since you have to play ranches to synergize with his ability. I think the fact that Circle M Ranch is just one of the best deeds in the game, period, that Kyle Wagner is going to be something that we're going to consider. But I really like the design of this because it's going to force you to play a gadget-oriented deck. You're not just going to throw this into a Morgan control deck and try to make this work and splash a couple gadgets in. Next up, we have another dude for Morgan Cattle Company. This is Lillian Morgan. She is a king of spades. She's 0 draw and 5 influence. She's 8 to play and 3 upkeep. She's got Huckster 2, and when she enters a posse, you put 3 Ghost Rock on her that you can only use for shootout abilities. And the Ghost Rock are discarded after the shootout. Then she has a shootout ability, and that is pay X Ghost Rock, X of your dudes in any location, join Lillian's posse. So obviously the 5 influence is incredibly strong, but she is kind of a chump and is going to rely pretty extensively, I would say, on either clubs effects like Pistol Whip or whatnot to shut down dudes, or her reinforcement ability to defend dudes. I think there are some issues with slotting her into the existing Morgan Cattle Company control decks, mainly because I think she's just going to be a 5 influence person for 8 and not really be able to utilize her abilities that much. That said, a 5 influence dude for pretty much any cost is going to be something you're going to at least consider for a Cattle Co. control deck. And the fact that her reinforcement ability could situationally be pretty strong, I think lends some credence to playing her. I'm not 100% sold that she's going to be a huge game changer just because she seems really expensive and really difficult to defend in the existing weak draw structure, weak shootout ability Morgan Cattle Company decks. Most of the Cattle Company control decks right now are looking to disengage from combat with things like Pistol Whip. So I think she's going to have to rely on that kind of stuff, and I could see situations where if you don't have the right card, losing 5 influence is just a game over thing. So I'm probably going to try her and probably be playing her, but I do see a lot of drawbacks and vulnerabilities and liabilities to playing her. Next up, we have Ulysses Marks. He's a dude for Sloan Gang. He's a 7 of spades with 1 draw, 2 influence. He's 4 to play and 1 upkeep. While Ulysses is at a saloon, the saloon has an additional control point, and he has a noon ability which does not boot him. If Ulysses is at a saloon, move another dude at the same location to the town square, booted. I think this guy is pretty much an auto starter in the types of Sloan Gang decks that I've been playing. Essentially what happens with Sloan Gang is we don't have enough influence for our starting posse if we play a really aggressive setup. So most of the time I've been starting Marion Seville to just give myself about 4 influence so that I don't just instantly lose the game on influence. And Marion's ability to get more bullets is generally not that great. It's definitely something you can pull off, but it isn't that strong. I think Ulysses' ability, on the other hand, is going to be immediately relevant. We play saloons already, or at least my decks do, because they already fit very nicely into the numbers that are really good for Sloan, like 5. So I think this guy is pretty undisputably going to be a starter in a lot of Sloan decks. I would pretty much encourage you to switch Marion out for this guy instantly. I've already tried this guy quite a bit, and I think he's really strong. His noon ability allows you to lock down deeds in ways that it's really difficult to do otherwise. And it's worth noting that it doesn't boot him to use the ability. So, you can use that to kick a guy out and you don't have to boot him. Just keep in mind, though, that you can't use his ability over and over and over and over. You can only use each ability once per turn. That's a pretty critical thing to remember with this guy, because otherwise it seems like you could just kick guys off the saloon endlessly. The next dude is also from Sloan Gang, and it is Alice Stowe. She's a queen of spades, and she is 3 stud, 2 influence, and she's 7 to play with a 2 upkeep. If one of your wanted dudes accepts a call-out, Alice may join the posse from any location without booting, and even when booted. Well, holy crap. She is probably one of the best inherent fighters in the game. The 3 bullets, really strong. The ability, really strong. I think Alice Stowe is pretty undisputably one of the best combative stud dudes in the game. The 7 cost is expensive, but I don't think it's totally prohibitive, especially in a deck that usually is going to be playing recruitment drive to get her out of the discard and get her in play. I think we're going to see some Alice Stowe's showing up. The queen is not a totally irrelevant value, although I'm not thinking that it's really one of the best for the Sloan Gang decks. So I think really what we're going to do is play maybe 1 or 2 of her just to have another large, really aggressive, and really strong dude in the deck. But I do think that she is pretty easily one of the best fighting guys in the game. And that ability to have her join even when she's booted, just teleporting all over the map, is really, really powerful and is something that Sloan Gang isn't particularly good at doing. Next up, we have a neutral dude. This is Wilbur Crowley. He is a 6 of spades, 1 draw, 1 influence, 5 to play with 0 upkeep, and his only ability is Huckster 1. Well, I really like the idea of having some of these neutral dudes so that we can expand options. I especially think that it's really good that this guy doesn't have a upkeep. That's because I think if you want to splash Huckster, in other words, if you want to throw in some spells into a deck that isn't particularly focused on them, starting a guy with no upkeep is pretty appealing. That said, there's some serious issues with this guy, especially in the existing Huckster decks. The fact that he's 6, I think, is more of a detriment than a strength. It's not an especially high value on pulls, and it's also the same as Bobo, who is clearly a guy that you want to play quite a few of in most of the 4th ring decks. So I like the idea of this card, but I don't really see why I want to play him right now, because I really think that barring maybe some like Sloan Gang decks with Jonah Essex, it's only going to be 4th ring that's really going to be playing a lot of hexes, and I think you can do what this guy does substantially better in those decks. So I like the fact that this card exists, but I'm not really excited to play it. The last dude in the pack is also neutral. His name is Roderick Baier. He is a 7 of spades, 1 draw, 1 influence, 5 to play, and 0 upkeep. And his only ability is Mad Scientist 1. Well, this dude is an analog to Wilbur in a lot of ways. I think most of the things I said about Wilbur, I agree with this guy as well. The no upkeep is really significant. The fact that he's neutral, we can start him with any faction, that's really significant. I do think this guy's actually worse, but that's mainly because the impact that the spells have on the game, I think, is quite a bit higher than the gadgets do. And while I think that the impulse for the spells is to play quite a few of them, the impulse to play the gadgets is to play a ton of them, and I don't really think it's worth playing gadgets unless you play like a lot of them, whereas I'm not sure I feel the same way about spells in that way. I think it might be viable to splash 1 or 2 spells into a deck and have them have a really good effect. I don't necessarily see which gadgets are going to do that for you. I don't know. I don't see why I want to play this guy, and I actually think that I'm less likely to try this guy than even Wilbur. But it's good to have this sort of thing in the game to give us more options and more things to play around with. Well, I'm going to end the first half of the review right here. We covered all of the dudes in the pack, and we had 10 of them, so there's quite a bit of new stuff going on with dudes. The next half of the review will be the rest of the cards, including, the deeds and the equipment and the new spells that we have. So make sure you tune in to the next part of the review, and I will see you over there.